I'm Pastor Amy Kienzle. Poverty, homelessness, racism. Most of us hear about these problems daily, whether in the news, talk shows, or in private conversations. But do we really understand how these issues impact all of us? And is there really anything we can do about them? Sacramento resident Faye Wilson Kennedy says there is. She's the director of the local Poor People's Campaign, a statewide and national organization that works to gain economic justice for the unhoused and the poor. I sat down with her to discuss her goals for our local community and how we can support their efforts.
Well, hello, Faye Kennedy.
Oh.
I'm glad that you made some time to meet with me. You work with the Sacramento Poor People's Campaign, as well as I know you have a number of other roles, I think, so maybe you can kind of share with us all the work that you do. But I'm really glad that you came to talk with us and made some time today.
Oh, thank you. On behalf of the local campaign and the statewide campaign, thank you for inviting us to come share our stories and how we can continue to collaborate in the future.
Yeah, and I know you've been connecting with St. John's more recently. You came to our film screening as a panelist, The Invisible Class, which is on homelessness in America, because a lot of your work is with unhoused people. And then also you spoke with our action team on homelessness. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit more about your work and to learn what you're passionate about. Oh, good.
Well, I'm here to share with you, but I'm also here to encourage people, whether it's through your church or through their church community or faith community, to get involved, because we have a lot of work to do locally as well as nationally.
Yeah. So why don't you begin just introducing yourself, even just who you are as a person? I know it's easy for us to be like, well, my job is, but where'd you grow up, or what things are you passionate about? Whatever you want to share about yourself.
Oh, thank you. So once again, my name is Faye Wilson Kennedy, and I currently live in Sacramento and grew up in Sacramento, but originally I came to California from Alabama, Mobile. And I always tell people I have a unique background. So both of my parents were born and raised in rural Alabama in Choctaw County in totally segregated society. And actually, prior to coming to Sacramento in 63, 64, I lived in a totally segregated society and communities. And so there's a funny story, even how I came about. So I was conceived and born in the same bed that I sleep in today.
Wow.
And the reason I was born in that bed is because, like I said a minute ago, I lived in a totally segregated community in the rural South. And my mother was pregnant with me, and she was going to the colored hospital, and the road was kind of bumpy, and she said, I'm not going to be able to make it. So she passed up the white hospital, and they turned around, and just as they got her into the bed, here I am.
You were coming.
I was coming, and I just came out to the world. So that's just an example how oftentimes people think that happened a long time ago. It didn't.
You are a witness, right?
I'm a witness. I'm 66 years old and lived in a totally segregated community. And that was
and she could have stopped. I mean, you're passing a hospital, right? But she knew she couldn't
Yeah,
go to
literally
that
they
hospital.
passed by. The white hospital was much closer than what they would call the colored hospital.
Wow.
And so even though we think things have changed, things really, really haven't changed around the inequity. So my father worked for the federal government at the time, and the Air Force Base was closing. And I don't even know how they did it, because back then there was no internet. But they selected Sacramento for two reasons, UC Davis and Sac State.
Okay.
They wanted my sister and I have an older sister who's now deceased. Matter of fact, both of my parents are deceased. And they wanted us to have access to an education. And back south, you have to be fairly well off in order to go to college. And so they selected Sacramento, and we came, and we initially lived in Oak Park. I went to Ethel Phillips Elementary School. Then we moved to the neighborhood that I grew up in South Sacramento. Went to a local junior high school, attended high school. Actually, I went to high school with people who went on to be fairly famous. So I went to high school with Cornel West.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And his brothers and sisters and everything. And faced some challenges in terms of This was in the late 60s, early 70s. Sacramento was still growing, still trying to find itself around the issue of race and class.
Yeah.
And Kennedy High School at the time was predominantly white. Matter of fact, when I attended, you could probably sit all the black folks there probably on 4 or 5 large cafeteria tables.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so the demographics has since changed, but some of the same challenges are still there.
Yeah.
Because our daughter went there in like, I think she graduated from there like in 2007 or 8 and everything. So that's how I got
And
to
she
Sacramento.
still, you
Oh, yeah.
still see some of the same.
Some of the same
yeah.
challenges and everything. So how I got involved with the Poor People's Campaign is as a young college student, my husband and I became members of an organization as college students at Sac State called the Sacramento Area Black Caucus. And the Sacramento Area Black Caucus has been around for more than close to 45 years. And we address issues as it relates to the black community, but we also partner and work with different organizations and different institutions. And Reverend Barber was at St. Mark's Church, United Methodist Church, probably around 2016, 2017. He was part of the lecture series that they host. A lot of us who part of the Black Caucus would go there, and he did such a wonderful job of helping us understand that we all have a role to play to improve the lives of all of us. And so we answered the call. So a year later, less than a year later, when we got word that they were going to organize a California Poor People's Campaign, so we all showed up. It was I never forget it. It was a very, very cold day in December that we all showed up at the Capitol. So people came as far away as LA, the Bay Area, Stockton.
Right, because this was for the whole state.
The whole state. We all showed up, and we said we were ready. We were ready for the call. And so we had people who were people of faith, people who were not people of faith. So, for example, my husband is a confirmed atheist. And so even he's involved because there's different ways that the campaign really likes to help people. You could be a person of faith, whatever your faith is, or you could be a person without any faith. There's work for you in the campaign.
And that was one of the things as I did some research for our conversation to learn more about the Poor People's Campaign. I saw on the website that it's from moral convictions, religious convictions, and also constitutional values.
Right. And that's very important. So what we try to do is make sure everyone feels comfortable when they're at the table, that their voices are heard. So make sure all voices are heard, whether they're Christian, Jews, Muslims, or folks who have no faith, Buddhists. And so, which means sometimes we have to encourage people to use their listening ears so everyone can have a seat at the table to share their ideas and words and everything.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, as I've done work as an outreach pastor and trying to help congregations understand that, good work for the sake of God's people is good work. It doesn't mean we only work with Christians, because if we did, we'd not achieve all that we could together. And can you talk a little bit about, one of the things I also say, and probably people who have heard other conversations I've had have heard this from me before, but, a lot of times well-meaning folks will say, well, I mean, church and state are separate. So that means it kind of ends up being a reason why we don't get involved politically, right? But I always say, well, church and state may be separate for good reasons, because we don't want the state telling us what to do, and maybe vice versa, right? But religion and politics are not. And I don't know if you have done reflection on that. I don't know if you have a current faith practice, but you shared that your background is Christian at least. And
Sure. So my background is Christian. Actually, I was raised in the Christian faith with two different faith. My mother was a Baptist, and my father came out of the AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church. So it's kind of funny, every other Sunday, so one Sunday we would go to my mom's church, the alternating Sunday we would go to my dad's church. And then when we reached a certain age, my parents said, which faith do you want to choose? So I chose to be AME, and my sister chose to be a Baptist.
Oh, okay. You kind of split the difference.
Kind of split, right. And so I'm not necessarily practicing anything. And when our daughter was growing up, what we tried to do is actually take her to different churches so she can see the experiences of how different people pray, how different people engage the community, and different things like that. So that's really, really important. So I feel like I have an advantage because I've been to, you name the faith almost, I've been to them, I've seen them, I've worked with different groups around social justice issues, and there's a place for everyone at the table because we need people with a good moral conviction to really lend their voice to changing the moral narrative that our country is experiencing now. We see it more so now. We saw it during the period of Reconstruction, during the after the Civil War.
Yeah.
We saw it during the Civil Rights Movement, but it's a resurgence of it, and we really, really need people at the table. So congregations can get involved by lending their voices, like St. Mark's Church. They bring in a host of speakers to share messages, to share lectures.
Is that St. Mark's?
St. Mark's United Methodist
Methodist
Church.
in Oak Park? Is
No,
that, or no?
It's St. Mark's
Or
United
Arden.
Methodist. It's out in the Arden area.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so different things like that. Different churches or different faith groups will have working groups, study group. And so there's many different ways. So when we do a call out that we need folks to send letters or to show up at different events, people understand why we're inviting them to show up to lend their voice to a particular issue.
Yeah.
So and everything.
Can you talk a little bit about the issues that the Poor People's Campaign is is working on? I know there's a broad spectrum of justice issues, or maybe speak about the ones that you're most passionate about too.
Right. So the Poor People's Campaign at the national level, statewide, and locally, we have different we call pillars. So the first pillar is that we understand the role of how systemic racism, how it plays out and impacts individuals' lives, and how systemic racism really impacts the lives of people of color, but it impacts all of our lives, and oftentimes people don't realize that and everything. And the other pillars include ecological devastation, the war economy, and we all know how much money our nation and nations around the world spend on making war. So just think if we can just bring a half of that money or a tenth of that money back to our country. So it's pillars
what it could do
like
for our
that.
communities,
Yeah, back to our local communities that we can really change people's lives. So those are some of the pillars, but most of all, the Poor People's Campaign is to put poor people at the center of the discussion, to build their leadership and to make sure they're there to share their ideas, to share their leadership. And so that's how we work and operate and everything, locally, statewide. So we always try to make sure that what we call impacted people or folks from impacted communities are at the table, providing input, providing leadership. So, for example, in California, we have 4 what we call co-chairs or quad chairs. I'm one of the 4 co-chairs from the Sacramento region, and I'm there as more of an advocate. And then Nell Mahan from the Bay Area, she's impacted, so she's one of the co-chairs. And then we have Reverend Beth Johnson, who is a Unitarian pastor. She's there representing the San Diego area. And then Rose Escobar, who's impacted and works with the union from the Inland Empire. And so we try to really put into practice what we preach, that we have impacted people at the leadership level, making decisions, we're listening to their voices, and then we try to do that as well as the local level. And then some of the issues that we're dealing with locally, as you mentioned earlier, really trying to address the issue of our unhoused or people who are homeless and experiencing homelessness, but as well as what are we going to do at the end of this month when the rent moratorium runs out and lifted. We're going to have millions of people statewide and locally are going to be out on the street, which is going to exacerbate the crisis that's already there. And so we're trying to work with those issues. And then also, excuse me, we've all witnessed the change in our climate and environment. So luckily, not even luckily, in Northern California, for the past 6 months to a year, we have seen fires. We have seen the
Drought,
smoke,
fires, yeah.
We have seen the extreme heat impact us. And so most people who are housed, we can retreat to our homes,
Right.
or we can retreat to our houses, or we can retreat to our cars. But when you're unhoused, you have nowhere to retreat other than that tent.
Yeah,
And
which gets very hot.
Gets
and
very hot.
Is away from water sources, like
Yes,
drinkable water
right.
sources.
And so most of the people in Sacramento don't even have access to clean drinking water.
Right.
And so when it's extremely, extremely hot, they really don't have access to drinking water. So the Poor People's Campaign locally, in conjunction with other groups, we started what's called the Basic Needs Committee, where we go visit the various encampments throughout Sacramento, provide what we call basic need, clean drinking water, sometime with ice, food, PPEs, masks. When we were literally in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, we provided gloves, hand sanitizers. We taught people about the importance of social distancing. We even helped people understand why they needed to wear a mask.
Right.
Because people don't understand. Oftentimes we assume people watch the news because we watch the news, but when you are
Right.
living in an
If
encampment,
you have limited information, or
Yes.
you don't have it coming at you in every way, right?
They didn't have it. And so we talked about why it was important to wear a mask, just simple things. They didn't know what particle was. They didn't know what particulates were.
Yeah.
And so we said it's just the spit coming out of your mouth, or just when you sneeze, we don't want that to touch another person. So that's why you wear a mask.
Yeah.
You're wearing a mask to protect the other person, but you're wearing a mask to protect yourself.
Right.
And then we taught them to stick their arms out, and that gives you about 6 feet distance, and that's
So give me some practical,
some
practical things to think about.
things,
And
right. So myself, Brother Carter, folks
Yeah.
who were unhoused, we literally went from camp to camp, particularly in 2020, and talked about that. So we went from working with visiting 5 encampments. Now we're doing about 30 encampments,
Yeah.
spreading the word, spreading the information and everything.
yeah, you talked about the issues that we all know about in terms of, the drought, the fires, pandemic. And like you said, those of us who don't have to worry about access to resources or air conditioning
Right.
or electricity, we don't always feel the impacts. We know if we can't go out to the dog, if I can't go out to the dog park with my dog because the smoke is bad, right? Or it's too hot. But, as we've done our ministries with unhoused folks, just seeing like how much even little changes in the temperature impact them disproportionately, and with the pandemic, just access to even just those de facto cooling centers like the library. You could go in and just kind of, sit and read a book and relax for a minute, or use the bathroom, use the
bathroom, get clean drinking water from the fountain.
And all that shut down immediately.
Immediately. It was like you went to sleep and you woke up, everything was shut down. People were sent home from their offices, and folks did not have access to services or resources that they normally would have.
Yeah.
Places like Loaves and Fishes shut down. That's where a lot of unhoused folks would get food, water, and services. Places just literally shut down because we didn't know.
Well, we didn't know what it was going to do, right?
And I understand that. And so
but it left.
People were still left outside to fend for themselves.
Right.
And so different groups formed. So one of the reasons I know Rebecca from your group here is that we all formed a group called the Services Not Sweet Coalition.
Right.
And where about 25 plus organizations as well as individuals came together to see how we could address the housing, the crisis of the unhoused here in Sacramento.
Yeah.
And how we can pair up services and resources, and how the unhoused can be part of that leadership and everything.
Yeah. So what are some success, and I use quotes because,
Right.
it's hard to measure sometimes, like with tangible numbers, which we always
Right.
want. Dominant culture wants numbers and stats, right?
Right,
But what are some of the successes or the progress that you've seen through your work?
Right. So I think the great successes was that we formed that coalition where we brought groups who didn't necessarily work together. We brought them together. The Services Not Sweet Coalition, we brought them together. And then we invited the community. So, for example, the Poor People's Campaign, in coalition with other individuals and groups, would sponsor a monthly brunch or breakfast where we would be, and we would primarily be on Stockton Boulevard, but we took it to South Sacramento. We would invite them to come with us where we serve breakfast or brunch to the unhoused. And it was one way of demystifying what people thought about folks who were unhoused. And they had an opportunity to engage them with us being there. And so they saw how we engaged them. So they heard me talking to them. They heard the folks calling me Miss Faye, and I was talking to them.
Right, so you had real relationships with people.
So we know them. They know us. They recognize my car when I drive up.
And not treating people like charity cases,
Right,
but they're
right.
actually people with
They actually work
gifts to
with us.
offer. And
They actually help serve the food. They actually help us come and set up.
Now, were you able, through those kinds of the brunches and things like that, to connect some of our unhoused folks to your campaign,
Yes,
like
to
that
our
they would
campaign,
join the?
right. So through our campaign, we have been able to get folks housed, get them off the street and housed. They've actually been a part of when we go out to the encampments where they became part of the Basic Needs Committee, serving the food, engaging folks, sharing the printed information. That's another thing. We try to provide people printed information about information that they need to know about, whether it's the child tax credit, whether it's about how to stay safe, how to stay cool. We do
Right, or I imagine
things
even these things like for low-income folks, like the eviction moratoriums, and like just let them know, like what are your rights, what's coming down, and
different things like that. And we try to include people who are currently unhoused or people who were formerly unhoused to come and be a part of the campaign, to share with us your firsthand experience, what it's like. But it also provided an opportunity for everyday people who are either part of a church group or faith group or a neighborhood association to come get involved, where they're not necessarily having to be responsible for actually organizing the Sunday brunch. They can just come, observe, participate, drop off something if they like. And sometimes people start off by just dropping off something. Then the next month we have something, then they'll say, okay, I'm going to come.
Right.
And then the next month they'll say, can I bring my grandchild or can I bring my teenage son? So we've seen the progression with folks seeing that they want to get involved. And then the next month, by the fourth month, they're actually showing up on our Zoom calls, participating and doing different things like that. Then by the fifth month, they're saying, how can we do more? How can we get our faith group at our church involved? Or how can we get our other neighborhood association involved? So it's different things like that, is being there on a consistent basis, providing the information, helping people see that there's a role for everyone. There literally is a role for everyone. So we have people, so we say to them, if in 2020, if you were too afraid to come out to drop off stuff, if you provide us an address, someone from the Basic Needs Committee, myself, Brother Carter, at the time Curtis, we will show up at your house, just put it out on the front porch or set it out, let us know the best time to come by and we'll pick it up. So we try to find a role for everyone and everything.
Yeah, I think it's human nature to sometimes think, to see the limitations first and think, well, I can, if only I wasn't X, Y, or Z, like too old, or if I didn't have like a health issue, or if I didn't have, if I had more time, right? There's all these barriers that we put up to serving, but there's a role for everyone.
And the good thing about 2020 is that people who did have access to the internet, we found ways for them to email their city council members, email the county board of supervisor, email the school board members, to monitor meetings via Zoom. So there was ways that people could still be involved and not necessarily show up in person. Because we wanted everyone to feel safe. And then when people would show up in person, we encourage people to wear a mask. We showed them how to wear masks. If people didn't have masks, we provided masks. We would provide masks to people in encampments, and we would talk about the difference, how it's actually, for people who live in houses, it's okay if you use a cloth mask because you can wash yours with warm soap and water, but when you live in an encampment, you don't have access to that. Oftentimes you don't even have access to porta potties. And so simple things, providing that really basic information to folks.
Yeah.
Is really good.
Well, like you were saying in your work too, it's incremental, right?
Yes.
And that's one thing we're learning here at St. John's as we, not only in our ministry with unhoused folks and trying to build a base for advocacy, or in our work of racial justice. We have a racial justice ministry, and we're trying to learn more about our own privilege, our own history, and be honest about it, and to learn about our whiteness and what that means. And sometimes people who get excited about it, they're passionate. It's always, and myself included as a pastor, sometimes I'm like, oh, well, why don't people just get it and get on fire and but you really do have to be patient and consistent, like you said. Just keep showing up, find ways to listen to people about where they're stuck, or where there's fear, or just uncomfortability, and not to always solve. I mean, sometimes we have to be uncomfortable,
And the neat thing is, I think people don't realize there's different levels of privilege. So those of us who live in a house, an apartment, we're very privileged. And I think we have to understand that. But we also have to understand that it's very tenuous, because if people lose their job, if my retirement check don't come, I'm gonna be calling you, Esperanza, up, like, where am I gonna live? So it's things like that. So I think what happens is we have to realize that we all are interconnected, that we all need each other, and that none of us are the enemy, that none of us have a lot of power. None of us really control the resources. Some of us control more resources than others, but even those who think they control the resources, they really don't control the resources. And I think people have to look at it and think about it in those perspectives. And so what I always tell people is that when you drive by an encampment, just think about the life that they're living versus the life you're living, particularly if you're housed, and think about how what you could do on the individual level, on a organizational level. And then one of the things I've learned, young people told me, Miss Faye, sometimes you OGs have to just shut up and listen. And sometimes I have to tell people that. Sometimes when I go to meetings, whether it's Zoom meetings or in-person meeting, or even when I go visit encampments, I have to shut up and I have to listen to what people are saying. And so I'm going to give you a really clear example. Is we are moving towards a society where we think we can force people who are unhoused into types of housing that they don't want. So for example,
I know that's some of the concern around the new siting plan for the city, right? That it's in theory it sounds good, right? That everyone will have a right to housing, But then if the right becomes not a right but a compulsion.
And not only that, but when you add some legal barriers there, for me, it's even scarier. So for a lot of women in particular, they are very uncomfortable with what we call congregate living, or when people are in this one big space, it may be socially distant. They may be in a room with 20 people. They don't know any of the 20 people. It's kind of like old style camping. That was fine when you were 12 or 13, but I personally don't know if I would like to be in a room with 20 people that I don't know.
Well, I know even when the plan before the pandemic was finding place, and it still sort of is part of the siting plan, but they had in each district find a location, and we had the Capitol Hotel or whatever it was that they converted in our district. And talking with some of the guests that come to our snack stop in the afternoons or different programs, they were housed there, but then you have a roommate, and if you don't, if that person has, everyone has their different issues, but if that person is dealing with substance use or mental health issues, and then you now are roommates in a small dorm, if we had folks tell us I had to leave because I just couldn't emotionally be in that room, and like you said, if I thought about it, it's like, would I be comfortable?
Yeah, I know I wouldn't.
And secure living
Right.
in a place with basically a stranger, but it's
right,
like, even if
right.
it's housing as opposed to being on the street, right?
Right.
But
And what happens is, and so we're moving as a society locally to trying to make that punitive.
Right.
And then there's other issues. So one of the persons who's unhoused, who's part of the campaign, a couple of years ago, his wife was in a boarding care facility and she died. And so whenever the word boarding care comes up, you can see him.
Yeah.
He's normally,
his association with it
yeah,
is-
it's very negative. He's a mild-mannered person. He loves being a part of the campaign. He wants to be housed. He does not want to be housed in a boarding care facility.
Yeah.
He does not. He's able to articulate that. So why would we force him or anyone who's able to articulate why they don't want to go to a boarding care home there? And
Right.
then to add some legal, to add some kind of fines to it.
Right.
Right now, poor people.
And it's not clear what the consequences might be.
Yes.
I know,
Right.
and like I think you were going to say, right, already homelessness is criminalized.
Right,
And so,
right. And so I think it's things like that that we have to really think through. Do we want to continue to criminalize a group of people that's already facing major obstacle?
right.
And
And
then,
if you know people don't already have resources, then
Yes.
to give them another fine. And then
Yes.
like one of our guests just yesterday, I was talking to him at our respite, and he had some kind of citation for smoking in the park or something.
Right.
And then he didn't appear. And now then there's the level of like fear of like, well, do I appear? And then if you don't appear, it's like $500 fine.
Right.
And so
it just- it
for
keeps
people that
adding-
don't have
right, it just
resources,
keeps adding
it's
up.
like,
And it's just basic things that I think as a society we don't understand. And we just had a fees and fine workshop. community
right. I heard
forum
about that. Yeah.
that we participated in. So I always tell the example that if someone in your family dies and you are trying to get access to their insurance, you have to prove who you are, right? You have to have a certified death certificate. That costs money.
Right.
So can you imagine if you're unhoused and someone in your family dies and you're trying to get the insurance and you have to get a copy of the death certificate, that's $35.
Yeah.
And-
And you have to be able to have access to the resources to connect to it, right? So whether it's internet or, and knowing how to do that.
Yes.
And then you probably have to get to a place somehow. So you
Oh,
got to go
yes.
across town,
Oh,
so
yes.
it's all, have an address where they could send it to you.
Right. So
you
all
know.
of those things that those of us who are housed don't
Right,
think
it's
about.
easy. Yeah, easy. Okay, I'll go online and pay
so
the,
the campaign is actually work with people. First of all, most people who are unhoused or poor don't have current driver's license.
Right.
And we're lucky in California. We have in most neighborhoods there's at least one DMV office, Department of Motor.
So it's not too far for people
right,
to
so
go.
we can help them, but there's still a cost,
Right.
$25 or $35 to get your driver's license.
And I know there are some organizations
Right.
that can give some vouchers and things,
Right,
but
and we try to work
but
with-
they have to
You have to
connect
get
with
there.
people
Yes,
and
yes, we try to
in the
refer
right
people to
moment.
those, but those organizations only have a limited
And a
supply.
limited, right.
So it's things like that oftentimes people don't think about. I know I serve on the board, the president of the Colonial Heights Library, and so I was really proud that my library and eventually the whole library system decided to really rethink fines, because we were finding people were not coming to the library because
They were afraid, right, that they had the
and so
fines
we
hanging over.
want people to come. The very group of people we wanted to come and utilize the library were staying away because they were not able to pay their book fines or the fine. And so I was really glad that we took that position as a local library, and then
the system,
the system
yeah.
decided that it was an issue that really needed to be addressed, and they addressed
Okay.
it and everything. So that's really great.
Yeah.
So it's things like that, how people it may be something small, but it's very important.
And it can have ripple effects,
Oh,
hopefully, if others, other even systems might say, okay, the library made this decision.
Right.
Maybe we could examine our
Right. Our policies
for different things.
Right.
And
I think that's one way institutions can really play a role in making lives better, not just for the unhoused, but for poor and working class families.
Well, now is going to be my question for you as, St. John's, the church is an institution, right? And we're blessed to have resources.
Right.
Not all churches are as thriving as we are as large. So we have people and also financial resources and a commitment to justice, but sometimes we don't know what can be our role. And I know in your work, you're empowering those who are often marginalized, right? And their voices aren't heard. And sometimes when you have resources, the relationship to those who don't can be one of power, like a power dynamic, right? Because I have, and I could help you if I choose to, or if I don't, right? And it puts power in our hands. So how do you see institutions like St. John's, like a church? What could we do? What would be some most effective things that we could do?
I think you guys are doing them. I think the idea that you guys have a respite program where people can come in. And
that's our partnership with Heart Midtown, which is the homeless assistance resource team.
You're opening up your facility for that. You have your congregation have a social justice committee. You're exploring the topic of what is privilege, what is white privilege. Those are the beginning steps.
Yeah.
And now it's about taking the resources that you have, whether it's the actual hard resources, whether it's your money, whether it's your building, putting them into action, providing scholarships for, literally academic scholarships for students who may need to go to college, or even book scholarships for students who are currently in, because books are very, very
right. Even those the material that they need for school,
the materials
if not tuition,
right?
Then,
providing backpacks for low-income families,
right, and
computers.
Things like that.
The other thing that we found, I'm also a part of a group called the Black Parallel School Board, where we address educational issues. What we found is that for particularly poor families and working class families, but we even saw it in middle class families, is that when families had to use Zoom, if you have more than one child in your family, your usual internet didn't work.
Yeah.
So even providing funding so families can upgrade their internet.
Right.
So they can have both children on Zoom at the same time.
Yeah.
So that became a major problem. And so we even heard from folks, middle class families, saying that they had to upgrade their system. They could afford to do that. They had the extra discretionary
some people
income,
have it,
but most people don't have that. And so you had kids who didn't have access, or parents had to decide, do I let my third grader get on the internet first?
Whose priority?
Yeah, and that's a really...
And if parents were working at home, it was another. Like everyone we had that issue, even doing our Sunday school classes. It's like, we have a confirmation student, a Sunday school student, and a parent trying to do things. And so, these are folks who can generally afford.
Those are some things I think congregations could do.
Yeah.
Even find out if folks within your congregations are having those challenges.
Sure. And
then partner if there's like a nearby school, if there's a nearby encampment, literally. And then if you really listening, people will tell you what they want and what they need. You may not agree with it, but people will tell you. And then you have to decide, do I... when my sister, as the last couple of years of her life, she was in a nursing center, and some of the people were smoking. And I was like, okay, so, and then finally I had to realize that's their decision. So not my decision. I'm not going to help them light the cigarette, but if they want to go outside, I'm going to open the door for them. So I think that's something we have to decide as individuals.
That is such a hard, and we deal with that here too. Like, oh, well, what do people need? And then we provide it, but we don't ask them.
Right.
And then judging if you do ask and you get an honest answer, then do we let people have agency? And in our tradition, we do believe God gives us free will. And yes, there may be limits. We set some boundaries on things that we would fund or give, but really having to listen to people about what they need. Yeah,
and I think what happens is we don't realize as a society that poor people and working class people, we really lock them out of the economy.
Right.
And we force people, whether we like it or not, to engage in what we would call the underground economy, where people may not be doing things that are legal, but they do that in order to survive.
Survival, yeah.
And so what we have to do is, what I try to do is tell people, look, I'm not here to judge you. So whatever you're doing, as long as you don't involve me and as long as you're not doing it in front of me, what can I say? Because at the end of the day, I have a house to go to, and you have to do what you have to do. And I also tell people who are living on the street with their children is that they maybe not let their children see what's going on.
Sure.
And everything. So those are some tough issues that we have to deal with.
And be honest about, but also, I think when, our mission at St. John's is to live God's love in the world. And, we say that God's love is not judging, at least in the way, yes, God wants good things for us, right? But, God gives us grace too, right? And sometimes we're so focused on like the punishment or the like, well, what's right, and people should be living right, and
who's to determine what's really right?
Right, and unless we understand people's stories, we judge without knowing, and we create more shame, which doesn't, kind of like the library fines, right? Like the shame can build up on people so much that then they're buried under it, and who is going to reach out and say it's okay? Take another step this way, right? Like giving people an opportunity.
I totally agree. So almost a year ago, literally in the middle of the pandemic, the Sacramento Poor People's Campaign and the Sacramento Homeless Union and South Sacramento Heart sponsored a town hall at the Stockton Boulevard encampment, where we basically listened. And what we heard from a group of people who had been chronically unemployed, who had been chronically unhoused, what we heard is that they wanted to go to work, they wanted access to showers, they wanted access to bathrooms, hand wash. What they were saying was everything that those of us who live in a house wanted.
Right.
And what they were asking for, nothing that they asked for was unreasonable. No one stood up and said, I want a Cadillac.
Right.
Or
if you could just give me $1 million.
Right. No one even said that. They wanted just basic things.
Right.
And we when we typed that up and shared, people would say, well, why don't they go get a job? Well, you can't get a job if you don't have transportation.
Right. Or if you can't take a shower and get dressed in nice clothes for the day, right?
Or even if they were able to get a shower, Sacramento doesn't have a really good public transportation system. Light rail doesn't go to all communities.
Yeah.
You're talking about privilege. Oh my God, that's one of the issues.
And people might have a bike, but it gets stolen, because it's it's so hard to keep.
Or try riding that bike in the hot sun, or try riding that bike
for an hour or something to your job.
Right. So it's different things like that we don't think about. And so we were really when people shared different things like that all they wanted was to be treated with dignity and respect. And so when we wrote that up and we shared that, people were just totally surprised. And I think that's some of the challenges we have, is to demystify and to really listen to our unhoused brothers and sisters, and really listen to each other, because I think all of us as human beings just want to be treated with dignity and respect. Because if we don't, we begin to see people as the other, and we know what we do as a world community when we begin to seeing people as the other.
Yeah.
What happens, and we don't ever want to go back to that again as a world community and everything.
Well, thank you. That's probably a really good note to end on, a good message. How can we get connected with the Poor People's Campaign if people who are listening want to know?
Sure. So if people have access to the internet, we're on Facebook. It's called Poor People's Campaign, Sacramento. They can contact us through that. They can also contact us through a phone number, which is area code 916-484-5025.
Great, and we can put that also in writing so people see it with us.
Sure, and I'm not sure when this is going to air, but if this airs before Saturday, we're the Poor People's Campaign, along with two other organizations, Sacramento Climate Coalition, the Red, Black, and Green Environmental Justice Coalition, and SMUD. And Fridays for the Future, we're hosting a climate justice festival. Because
Yeah, that's September 25th. So I don't know if this will air before that,
Okay.
but
It's free, open to the public, family friendly. Bring out your lawn chair. It's one way of addressing critical issues in a fun, non-threatening manner, because the whole issue of the climate, environmental justice can just be very very hard for people, and you can just see people just on overload. But we're going to be doing it in a fun manner this time.
great. Well, that's great. Thank
Yes.
you so
No,
much
thank
again
you.
for this conversation and for your work. And I look forward to ways that St. John's and our ministries might be able to partner with you and the work that you do.
Oh, good. Don't worry. Like I said, there's always work for us.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.